Good afternoon. It's almost 1:30 on a Monday afternoon, and I thought I'd uh, continue the PowerPoint that I posted yesterday, Sunday, to complete that particular week one. I'm sorry, week four, part four. Start again, chapter four, part one PowerPoint. I was very concerned about overloading you with the material there, because there's a lot to think about there. And what I'm trying to do is to spiral you together to gear you up for the midterm. I've already posted the case study. It's called Scott Rocks. It's not open yet for those of you who want to get a head start on that. If you ask me to, I'll send it to you. But I didn't want to really push that yet because I'm not sure that everyone will have had an opportunity to get through all the material that case study will expect. It's a brief case study. It's not 75 pages, maybe a page and a half at the most. Really ask you to begin to use the material and the issues that we've talked about and that you've discussed so well in so many places for so long with me, so that you can apply those insights that you have to how you would analyze what the issues and themes that seem to be suggested by that particular case study. And so, no, I don't think you're ready to answer that in full. I know some of you are very eager, and you know who you are, and I smile and admire that. But I also think if you want to do the best job you can, you should wait a little bit. But I think I'm releasing it on the 18th. You'll have plenty of time to get it done because it's due, I believe, in the first week in October. So to come back to the material that we're talking about today, again, a continuation of yesterday's PowerPoint, which is for this previous week, for this week coming up, and things will begin to mushroom together. But I want to do is pick up some of the slides that I did not finish yesterday, and then drop into the new PowerPoint for the back half of part four. Part four. I'm having trouble talking today. Enough said. So what I'll do is I will share the screen and get going. And here we go. All right. And good instructional leadership always says you go back before you go forward. Same would hold true for human resource managers who are in charge with, in essence, my word, the small t, teaching, enabling your stakeholders, enabling your colleagues, and sometimes your superiors, I suppose, to acquire the skills and dispositions and content knowledge they need to successfully contribute to the purpose of the organization. And so we'll just drop back for a second, and then we'll go back with that. We said one piece of needs assessment requires that you come up with goals. And that's clear enough. But your personalized intent would be, and then to consider how that goes into a lesson design. Now, lessons from Plato, Fred Flintstone, back through George Jetson, if those of you know who I'm talking about, pretty much start the same way. I'm not advocating that that's the best way to do it, by the way. I'm just saying this is traditionally how it goes along. The people start with a goal, and then they work out of the goal to strategies, and then all the way through to evaluating whether the strategies enabled you to meet the goal. And that's pretty much pro forma. And all lessons are designed that way. So rather than boggle your mind with other ways to think about this, I call that inside out thinking, actually, and I'm smiling because that's the way I usually like to think myself. You need to think about how a lesson design looks like, how it's created, and it begins with intent. The intent, for the 4 millionth time, is woven back with your understanding of the world out there, your understanding of the world in there, that is to say, the organization that you serve, how they conflict, how they merge together, and what each means for the other in order to be able to meet the purpose of the organization. And yes, we can say goals. I remind you again, and I did remind you that I would remind you many times about Bloom's taxonomy. I'm not going to put up a chart. I'll probably pull a chart together and give it to you down the line. But again, Bloom's taxonomy of learning is a leveled up approach that begins with knowledge and ends with creation. In order to create, you need knowledge. In order to evaluate, you need knowledge. You work backwards or forward. You go up and down the triangle with that Keep that in mind. Keep those verbs in mind. Remember the lower order thinking skills, which sometimes are altogether appropriate, and the higher order thinking skills. That is to say, the hots, the lots and the hots, or the lots versus the hots, depending on the nature of the training that you're trying to get into. I would probably say, as I think out loud, that even the most basic training needs that you have for your employees, the most basic, simple things, obviously start with knowledge goals or remembering goals. I think is how sometimes Bloom describes it. But you know what? You would be remiss if you didn't build in some of those higher order skills, even for those individuals, so that they have a chance to challenge themselves to elevate the way they learn and how they think for the good of the whole. So we spoke about that. Again, I'm just kind of backing up to go forward. We talked about need theory, which was about Maslow, another variable that needs to be accounted for. And that goes for you and for me and everyone else in between. Everyone's got the same needs. Not too many people get to self-actualization. I don't think I know anyone who's particularly self-actualized. But we all have physiological safety, love and belonging, and esteem needs. And those of you who don't have esteem needs, that you've moved past that, I guess we could say you've been self-actualized. I can't say that it's true for me in a moment of private sharing, professor to student. We talked about in terms of lesson design or learning design, issues of expectancy, instrumentality, and valence. And we talked about efficacy, self-efficacy. It's a major, I'm going to call it a buzzword, but that's really demeaning a word that's much more powerful than that. A major concept that people have been paying a lot more attention to, especially when we consider the intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators. There are studies from the 1930s. I'm smiling at that's almost 100 years ago now. There are studies from the 1930s where they measured how motivated workers would be in an assembly line, factory atmosphere. And they tried to see what motivates them. And most people thought it was money. When they found pretty quickly was that it wasn't about money. If I doubled your pay, could you turn out that double the output of light bulbs, whatever it is that you're producing? Maybe for a while, but after a while, that will slide backwards. And the research generally, even past World War II and then through up into the early part of the 21st century, keeps pointing to intrinsic motivation and the responsibility of employers and to, as Sengate talks about, to help people develop their personal mastery and their personal connection to the good of the whole as such. And that's what expectancy is about. The confidence of the learning, boosting that confidence by finding the right kinds of strategies to assure you and assure them that they can, in fact, master the skills and apply the knowledges that they need to have to be successful. And there's Knowles again. We spoke about Knowles yesterday. Can't get enough of Knowles in certain senses. It's about the experience. It's about person's self-concepts and their readiness, among other things, for you to consider. And I emphasize that the link I have there has some more depth about that than I'm giving it to here on the PowerPoint. Now we're talking about information processing. Maybe not all of you are familiar with the term metacognitive. I presume many of you are, but I don't think necessarily all of you are. Metacognition is about thinking about your thinking. About thinking about your thinking. To what extent can you get your learners, your workers, to think about their thinking? Why did you decide to turn the lug nut this way versus the lug nut that way? I'm thinking of I Love Lucy, which probably most of you never watched, but there's an whole I Love Lucy show where Lucy and Ethel have to wrap candy in the little wrappers that go into the boxes, and the candy's coming down on a conveyor belt, and they have to begin to move more quickly to get the candy wrapped properly, and then they ultimately, make fools out of themselves. It's pretty funny. What they're thinking about, they're thinking. This is maybe a silly example, but I guess about 2 months ago, maybe a little longer than that, I got into Wordle. I'm pretty good at word puzzles. I'm not an expert. I do terribly at Wheel of Fortune. I'm having a lot of trouble with that. I don't have the skill for that as much as I wish that I did. I can still win at Jeopardy probably 90% of the time because that's really recall. I'm very good at recall and reasoning. But in terms of the visualization of word and letters, it's tough for me. So I'm looking at Wordle, and I probably get the word if you know the puzzle 4 out of 7 times pretty easily. And then there's 2 times where I struggle and get it, and there's one time where I rip what's left of the hair out of my head because I just have a lot of trouble with it. And I almost always get all the words, but from different points of view. And what happens between my ears and my little bald head is I have to say, well, what was I thinking about? Let me think about my thinking. All right, okay, I tried to string the vowels together differently. I tried to look for blends. What was my knowledge of phonics? And did I apply it properly? Was I trying to see the whole word? Now, different people bring different sets of metacognition to this. And it's really pretty fascinating. So keep that in your consideration as you design learning programs, as you assess, either informally or formally, as you assess the learning capacities of your stakeholders as such. And when we talk about the implications of learning theory, and there's a learning theory about a learning theory out there lately. There are closed versus open skills. I'm not going to beat that one to death, but I am going to make the point about what we call convergent thinking versus divergent thinking. What kind of thinking do you need I keep saying students, your employees? What kind of thinking do you want for them? Now think about convergent. You can see my hands coming together, converging, concluding, bringing it to a close. Or more really often than that, specifics. Not always, but more are specifics. This is the way you turn the screwdriver. This is the way you wrap the candy. We're not going to argue and we're not going to deviate from that. These 14, Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. The president of the United States is President X. Convergent thinking, specifics. Is that what you want from your learners? In some cases, that is what you want. In other cases, you want its opposite. It's open skills, which would be divergent thinking. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm holding up a highlighter. And if I ask you to tell me all the things you can think of, I could do with a highlighter. Could probably think of several. That's divergent thinking. Another word for it is creative thinking. If I ask you to name the first, do it as we speak. If I ask you to name the first ship that if I said the word ship, what's the first thing you think of? My experience is, believe it or not, almost always it's either the Mayflower or the Santa Maria. And then I wait, and someone will say, "Well, okay, the Starship Enterprise." When I say name a couple of other ships, and then someone in the back of the room will say, "What about citizenship? What about fellowship? What about workmanship?" The other people, "Oh, they didn't tell us to do that." That's because their minds were thinking convergently rather than divergently. And we all know there are plenty of activities, more than we probably realize, and maybe not enough, where we do ask people to think creatively, to think across possibilities and probabilities rather than to specifics. Now, I can't tell you, based on where you work right now, I can't tell you whether or not you have your needs are more convergent than divergent, or there's a blend of that. But you need to decide that. in order to really make decisions about the kind of learning programs you want to create for your colleagues. And with that, okay, as I said earlier, you need to weave, embed, drive in adult learning theory as often as you can. So we go back to Knowles for a moment and see, this is the answer to your prayers if you pay more attention to it. Okay, I'm going to stop that PowerPoint. And if you think of it, there's a lot of material in there. If you were going to do any kind of needs assessment or create a plan along those lines. And we go to the next PowerPoint. P.S. I don't like teaching from PowerPoints. How I wish I had you in a class where we could bounce off each other. Best I can get out of you is to have you show up on a Monday night office hours. And I'm hoping that I see some of you tonight. He smiled. Okay, I'm looking for something here. Okay, this one hasn't got pretty colors on it, but it's got good material on it. Again, I explained this before several times already. You needed to understand that there's just so much material in here. I didn't want to. I'll probably come back to chapter 4 next week in a certain sense, because there's so much material that you need to distill, burn off, embed into your own cognition in order for you to plan what you want to do by way of assessing other people's needs. And with that, we'll take the time to pull this piece through. And the goals for this are a little different. Now we're talking about the internal things people bring to their learning and the external things that affect leaders. World out there is always out there, and the world out there sometimes, often, actually, as I'm sure you are aware of, and including for ourselves, affects how we learn, whether it be a crisis or personal emergency, illnesses, relationships, any number of things. The external issues can certainly twist and turn how people learn. And you need to be somewhat, or to the extent that you can, work that through. I'm thinking of a study by Anthony Brick, B as in boy, R-Y-K, who studied a lot of this. And basically, he said organizations are driven by relationships. Now, that sounds like it's obvious, but believe it or not, if you study human relations management, organizational management theory, that was not the way people saw things until really after World War II. Now, you say to yourself, well, World War II is going on 80 years ago. That's relatively short in the history of research. And the point I think I made yesterday as well was that the research about human relationships has so much to do with obviously how people connect with each other and how they circle around each other to do the things they need to do for the group. Forgive me for deviating. I'm thinking about having watched the New York Giants yesterday, who certainly lost many more games than they've won in the past X amount of years, and whom I watch just about every Sunday of my football life. Won a dramatic game yesterday. A little bit of luck, but they won a game that they wouldn't have usually won in the past several years, I don't think. And the joy and the camaraderie and the connection among, as I've been reading about it today, among that group that the coach has engendered and the new organization seems to have developed, subject to change, we all know, is a wonder to behold. Which doesn't mean, by the way, that an athletic team can't hate each other's guts and still win a championship. But if you put that on the scales of human relationship groups versus the dictatorship ones, human relations will win. And that's what that's about in terms of what are the external conditions that affect learners to practice and master the skills that you want them to have. We've already talked about open and closed skills and cognitive transfers. We'll come back and do some more of that in a second. So there's a phrase I use a lot, and this is can't be emphasized enough, and that would be What's the message behind the learning music? And if you don't feel comfortable as a human resource manager, I don't think you have the learning theory background, then for heaven's sakes, go get a consultant to go figure it out for you. Because this is a critical piece of making all the pieces of the culture fit. When you really need to get behind, how are my folks learning? What's bearing down in the learning? What's supporting it? What do I got to give them to help them become optimal learners as such? Do they attend? Which is a fancy word. Do they pay attention? Do they form mental constructs? Can they visualize something? How motivated are they? Again, externally or internally? How do you perceive that? Here's an example. I mean, not a great one. If my absentee rate is higher on the day after payday than the day before payday, I'm going to guess that there's an extrinsic motivation problem there. I'm exaggerating that, but I think it's simplistic enough for us to work with. What are the motivation issues that are going on there? More importantly, in my mind, most important, to tell you the truth, is the connection to purpose. They truly have I'm being somewhat sarcastic here, not sarcastic, simplistic. They're saying, have they drank the Kool-Aid that speaks to why this organization exists? And how do you know that? It's just a harder question to answer, actually. How do you know they're connected to it? Did you, as the human resource manager, or did the boss or bosses make that clear? We're here to make people healthier. We're here to have people more satisfied with their lives. We're here to help people help each other. Or we're here to make a profit for the stockholders. Think about that. Okay? Can they enunciate the purpose? And will they be willing to fight to the, I'm exaggerating, but I'm more nearly committed to what I'm saying than you might think. Are they willing to run through fire to sustain that purpose and meet it? The way you do that is by talking to people, putting people in groups, and listening to what they say. Again, going back to the message behind their music. Listen to their verbs. Listen to the same themes they say over and over again. Working storage is, again, about capacity. Not everybody's got the same, pardon my French, I apologize for offending anybody, IQ. And so certain things exceed my IQ, that's for sure. Certainly my sensory IQ. And certain things are hopefully well within it. And are you going to assign something, some kind of learning task to sets of people who may not need that capacity? Maybe may compensate for that with strong senses of motivation, and you go from there. And you can think of examples of that, I'm sure. Attending is what I said: focusing, listening, and emphasizing skills, habits that you need in order to be successful at the tasks that you have. Can they form what's called schema, which is a mental picture? Are they extrinsically or intrinsically motivated? How do you know? Listen to their verbs. That's the simple answer. Connected to purpose. To what extent do they drink the system's disciplines Kool-Aids? And again, that's a terrible verb I just use. To what extent do they embrace them, endorse them, try to practice them in your observations? What are their perspectives on systems? Does the lug nut people only care about turning the lug nuts and not worry about the rest of the wheel being constructed up down the assembly line? Or one of you I know works in city government. You only worry about how your department processes the applications and not whether the application has any application to other parts of the departments. That's when you run into the kinds of problems you have. Do they recognize the systems connects? Are they aware of their own personal mastery needs? And that's a biggie. It's easy for me to talk to and more difficult for you necessarily to discern, again, by listening. And giving a, I'm hearing you say the word hate. No, that's a bad example. I'm hearing you say the word bosses 10 times in the last 5 minutes. What do you mean by that? Why is everything about the bosses? Well, the bosses tell me what to do when I do it. And if I get the man to me, then I lose my job. That tells you something. Or if they say, I'm really not confident in wrapping those candies into that wrapper on the conveyor belt. I can't move fast enough. I can't move fast enough. What does that tell you about their mastery needs? And how do you help them get better at it? Most importantly, especially in the 21st century, is the idea of team learning. Do they listen to each other? The pat phrase is active listening. I hear you say that. Do I understand you correctly when you say this, and this? Is that what you mean? I'll tell you what, help me understand that better. Now, just by doing that, you encourage people to tell you what you didn't understand in the first place. And it also sends the signal to each other that you want to hear each other's thoughts. Do you need that for every single occupation that's out there? Of course not. Do you need it for a lot of them? Most of them, without a doubt. And we talked about mental models many times already. What kind of mental models do you think dominate the group? Essentially, there's two kinds. There's one that promotes collaboration and mastery of what's necessary, and there's one that defeats it. Which one is the more powerful? And if the bad guy, the negative one, is more powerful, do you bury it, or do you find a way to integrate it so everyone can hear it through active listening? And again, a shared vision by a lip service thing. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I pledge allegiance to the flag, when you really don't. Working storage, again, we said, is about capacity. Sometimes it has to do with whether you're physically strong enough. Sometimes it has to do with your level of learning or level of cognition. We've already spoken about learning styles: visual, motor, the one I'm not good at; oral, also not so good at, but in my case, but listening skills and my ability to make things with my hands as such. What kind of thinkers are they? Are they divergers or convergers? Are they creative, or do they bring things together? Are they theoretical? Or do they need to be concrete? This is what you do. Don't even think twice. This is what you do. And there are people who operate from that frame, and you can't move them to that another frame all that easily. You have to work with the frame that you have. And the question on the bottom is important. How would knowledge about these factors change the way you create your training before you create the training? That's the question. We talked about closed skills and open skills already. Open skills, people are more generalized. Closed skills are more specific to convergent needs as such, depending on the job that you have. Okay, working off the cognitive theory transfer point. Have you thought about everything? Have you thought about the specific job needs that are out there? The long-term ones? And have you, above all, most importantly, analyzed, assessed, evaluated, decided about your stakeholders' capacity to meet the organization's needs? You got to put that all into the pot and boil that off, distill that, and it brings you to objectives. Now, sometimes people think that this is kind of just splitting hairs, but it's really not. There's a difference between objectives and goals. An objective is a goal, but it's more specific. That's the simplest way to look at it. If I took my bow and arrow and I said, I want to hit the target, that may be a goal. If my objective is to hit the bullseye, that's an objective, because that's more specific. Goals have, so it's about your expectation, what you really want to see happen, conditions of and what conditions you have to do that. So here's one on the bottom in yellow that you need to model for yourself. So after instruction, and think this is a high level, this is a HOTS goal objective. This is the HOTS objective. After instruction and problem solving about clients' concern about delivery dates of company products, customer service reps will pinpoint problems and accurately inform their decision making. That, my friends, is an objective. See the word accurately inform, not guess, accurately inform. Seems to me like every time I call a helpline, but I have a problem with my computer, or most of the time it's technological, or a delivery I just got that was, a disaster. What the people have been trained to do, they'll say, so I think I understand what you're saying. You're saying that you're not happy about the package you got. And you said, yeah, that's it. That person's been trained to listen to you specifically because they don't want to be vague about this. They want to be able to pinpoint what it is that you want. That, my friends, is an objective. An objective is a goal with a pinpoint. The more nearly you create objectives for yourself, the more nearly you have your hands held to the fire, but the more nearly you can be sure that what you're getting is effective in terms of the needs of the group or of the organization, assuming that you made good objectives to begin with. So that's about context. And then when you're talking about the context of things, the background story, Disney's really good at this. Every hotel in Disney or every ride has a backstory. You may not know it, but they have one. And it's all completely made up, or almost completely anyway. And the stories kind of give people a background or something context to work from and make this happen. It helps you understand the nature of the job, how you mean to weave the strategies you mean to bring off the objective. If I want to teach somebody how to hit the bullseye with a bow and arrow, I don't know if I'd blindfold them, at least not right away, because they got to be able to learn how to really focus their eyes to coordinate and align their motor skills to hit that target straight away. And you need to model the pluses, like you do in your PMIs, the pluses and the minuses. Now, to get this off the ground, to get your needs assessment off the ground, these are particular things you may want. I'm not going to read that to you, but this is very helpful. It's right out of the chapter. You can read it in your chapter more carefully. What you need before you start your needs assessment. Where you're going to do it. And how you set that up. If you set people up in a circle, it's different from setting people up in rows. If you set people up in small groups all around a building, it's different from having them sit together in one room. And the message behind the music is there's a different expectation of the training. I love doing this kind of thing. I'm smiling because that's the kind of things I like to pull people together on. So the physical space, as well as the mental spaces that you create, has all to do about how you're going to do these needs assessments. And we'll stop with that as far as I think we pretty much exhausted that. The discussion question for this past week was a PMI. I'm going to continue that discussion question. It's going to be an additional discussion question about the back part of this chapter. So there's 2 discussion questions about chapter 4. Both of them are PMIs about what you've read and studied across 2 weeks. I hope you understand that clearly enough, because I just think that this particular chapter steers so much more of what we're going to be doing for the balance of the semester. With that, okay, I send you on your way. I'm not going to post this right away, but it's going to be up pretty quickly. And maybe I'll just put it up now anyway, just so that people have it. And so I'll talk to myself. Take care.